Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on December the 28th, 2014. I hope you all had a Merry Christmas and are getting over all the food and drink that you've perhaps taken, and you've taken your aspirins and all their stomach remedies, etc. And maybe kissing made up to those who you've had a few disagreements with when you were under their influence. And everything's getting back to normal slowly as we go in and get ready for the new year, of course. And the new year will always be new every year, as long as we're alive, that is. Then you're dead, and you don't care anymore, you're not around. But New Year's coming up, and I'm sure lots of plans have been laid. In fact, I know they have been by governments, etc. And the world government, because they're all working together. For those who haven't noticed yet, I don't know how you can miss it, but they all work together. And whatever one country puts through as a test balloon or trial balloon, every country adopts the measures immediately too. And they'll say to you, well, France is doing this, why don't we do that? As though it's okay. If they were beheading people in China, for instance, or even Saudi Arabia, where they sometimes do, then maybe we should do it too. That's the rationalization they give to the public for putting things forth. So I'll be touching on some of this tonight, but I don't really want to bore you too much and upset your festive spirit, because after all, as I say, this coming year will dish out all kinds of unpleasant news. In fact, as long as you live, that's all you get. In fact, it's all you've had in the past, for those who bore to follow it at all. And even though they put in all their happy stories, and mind you, the media were told years ago to start putting in happy stories, little trivia stories and things that make you smile. You know, somebody turns an old lady's purse and wallet, and Biggie talks about that to make you think everything's just wonderful and peachy, and to get you off what government's doing behind your back. And that's the way it is, because everything today is done by subterfuge and chronology. Chronology is a doctrine, folks. It's not, and an art too. It's an art form. And there are professional chronologists out there that help to manage your minds for you. Everything that you think you know, and what they're going to teach you, in fact, is fact, right down to opinions on everything, and how to put things over upon you through public relations, marketing techniques, which make the most unpleasant things and nasty things sound rather nice, so much so that you might actually want to go along with it. And it works awfully well because they use psychology so much, and behaviorism, and neurologists, and all the different ologists are involved in conning you, because that's the art of chronology, you see. But we live in an incredible age, an era of greed. Managed and very organized greed. That's the beauty of it, you see. If you want to get awfully rich, you've got to be apparently psychopathic, or maybe a pure psychopath, but congenial enough to get on with other psychopaths and get up to the top. Then you can get really organized, a big gang, and be very respectable, of course, because you're impervious then to media attacks, and you can pull out lawyers as fast as you want. And keep everybody off your back, and then you train the public that you're respectable. It's an old method, and it works awfully well in a system where money is all powerful, and that's what we live in today. Monopolies run everything, and that's the art of it. Monopolization, cornering every market, suppliers, manufacturers, you name it, even the ones who'll sell, you corner those markets too by, you will tell the purchaser what you're going to supply them with, like Walmart does, and what to do about it, and what to sell it at, and so on. So everything that you need to survive, and everything you don't need to survive, has been cornered by the big gangs at the top. Monopolies, of course, very powerful, and they have respectable, again, they're always respectable, they have respectable lobby groups who have the handshakes going with Congress and politicians and bureaucrats across the world to make sure that laws are passed to give them the right to sell their products to you, basically, or even force it upon you. And to eliminate all competition. That's what you do. You always eliminate competition. There's nothing nice about business, and that's the way it is. Business is war. And that's what the Japanese were taught by the West, actually, when they reconstructed Japan, that business is war. And the Japanese took that very, very seriously. The only difference is, because of their pride, and in what they produce and so on. They made awfully good products, far superior to that of the West, in fact, especially cars and things, and motorbikes, and electronics. I can remember years ago, there was an awfully good documentary came out on built-in obsolescence, as it was called. Went through some of the history of it. Others have come out since, but where apparently, supposedly, it started with, I think it's much older, but it started with the electric light bulb, when light bulb manufacturers eventually formed a cartel and all agreed to lower the standards of light bulbs so they wouldn't last as long. And they actually had a timetable of years to implement the next step of drop down, less standard, and down until you had them, the incandescent ones that would just pop after a few weeks sometimes. And that's good for business. They can keep really churning these things out like crazy. But then it was spread across the whole field, basically, and got worse in the 50s. And in the 60s and in the 70s, it was standard across the board, and everything's plummeted ever since. Everything looks nice and shiny when you buy it brand new, lawnmowers, whatever it happens to be, but no time at all, the rusting away, and that nice shiny paint is gone. And the things don't work very well, things break and all the rest of it. And I can remember in that first documentary many years ago, they talked about the Japanese auto industry that really took Europe and other parts of the world by storm, because they were so efficient, high fuel mileage, and guaranteed to work all the time. They were just way superior in quality and dependability to anything produced in Europe and elsewhere. And then the American Auto Manufacturers Association, with some politicians from the US government, went over to demand that Japanese, if they wanted to sell cars abroad and get imported into the States, for instance, they'd have to lower the quality to an extent. And the Japanese put up resistance about this. It was against their nature and their pride, this personal pride and national pride, to lower the quality of something. If they made something they wanted to be awfully good, a strange concept for the West. We'd already been brainwashed into buying junk. And you find that there was a compromise made where the US said, okay, make the bodies worse. Don't put primer on them underneath the paint, etc. Don't put so much paint on them, and they'll rust, you see. And so even though your engines will last a while and be awfully good, because there's a good selling point, but the bodies will rust out and they won't go on for too long after, say, a few years, for instance. Well, the Japanese are awfully good at obeying orders, even though this can really confuse them. And they went overboard in the first few years, and the Japanese cars, the bodies and the trucks were just rusting out like you wouldn't believe. And of course, the American Manufacturer Associations of automobiles didn't want to tip them off and say, oh, well, you've kind of overdone it. It didn't want to tell them because it would mean less sales eventually in the US and more American motors would get sold instead. But eventually the Japanese caught on and made them a bit better. But everything's monopolized. And those who can lobby government and afford to lobby government win, basically, from food prices to everything you can imagine. Everything's monopolies, folks. That's the whole point, you see, of cutting out all independence and freedom of production. In fact, free trade has nothing to do with freedom at all. It's to get everybody else out of the businesses for contracts abroad, and to keep the big contractors in, so that only their stuff can get sold, etc. Now, I've gone through the history, lots of history, to do with all of this kind of thing that I'll be talking about tonight. And you can go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com, remember, make use of the archive section, because there's so much in it over so many years that you'll learn an awful lot. It's only people who get all what they think are facts from television and listen to the major news all the time who are naive. They're kept naive. That's the whole purpose of TV really today. One of its main purposes is to keep you awfully, incredibly naive with propaganda stories and dramas and fiction to make you think that a good superior agency is always at work, and that criminality or even nastiness in people doesn't exist. and any particular authorized authorities. And nothing's further from the truth, of course. That's beautiful propaganda when it can brainwash you into believing that everything's there on the up and up. And good people go into council, your local councils, for instance. Good people are taking care of your money that they tax off you for good purposes and so on. And of course, it isn't every so often they jack up the prices of taxes so high for local councils and so on, and areas and city councils. And then you find out that you just can't find it where the money's all going, because they won't tell you. Because it's going into a lot of pockets, folks. And friends and associations' pockets own big businesses and contractors' jobs and things like that. You see, they won't tell you. So everything is really corrupt on the inside. And any institution, once it's an institution of any kind, looks after its own interests and becomes secretive and paranoid even. And anything they disclose to the public is put through filtering machines called marketing specialists, like people who soften all the nasty bits or omit them altogether to make things sound so wonderful and swell, just like the TV and Leave It to Beaver or Andy of Maybury tells you. It's the same kind of thing, and that's basic propaganda. Because everywhere you look, there really is corruption, incredible corruption. Another thing too, if the corrupt ones go overboard with their corruption, they all get frightened because they could expose all of them on the way down in councils, etc., who are all into it in some level or another. But when someone goes really overboard with it, they hush it up and they don't fire them, or they don't just fire them and tell the public. They try to ask them to resign quietly. That way it keeps it out the papers and stops any inquiry into, well, if this one was getting away with that for years, what about the rest of you? You see? All institutions do the same. Protect their own image. Image is so important. You'll even see it in the different movies they put out there, where something happens, like, a coming plague, a coming this, a coming that, whatever it happens to be. And the first thing they do in, say, Congress or the British Parliament is, well, don't tell the public, they'll panic. That's the excuse for everything. Don't tell the public, they'll panic. In other words, treat you like children. And they do. They do treat you like children. It's quite something. As long as it's put over in the mainstream news by a regular authority figure, the newscaster that you've learned to trust and watch for years. That's why they pay them so much to stay on, even when they're falling off their chairs at 80 years old. Now, everyone knows by now that the media, the mainstream media, works with governments. They've always worked with governments, because that's how governments dream up the ideas to brainwash you, and it's put over upon you by the media, you see. And if you can control all information, of course, as it did in the past, most folk really could swallow it and say, well, that's all information they're getting, you see, from different stations that all give you the same news. And governments are always fudging figures, of course. It's the oldest game in the book, fudging figures for the economy and how good we're doing, or whatever it happens to be, because that's what governments do. They have whole departments that work literally on softening the blows or eliminating the blows altogether and making you think everything's just wonderful and cozy and rosy. But I've done so many talks in the past about the war that's always going on, a real organized war to utterly remake the whole world, all of the societies, into a new system planned a long time ago. And people worked fervently, generation after generation, often from the same families or groups, put that way, and to make this all happen. And part of the old idea of perpetual war, remember, I've read that too from the military magazine, the US military magazine, where they talked about perpetual war would be used across the world. It worked awfully well in their own country, in the US and, say, Britain, and they'd export it across the entire Middle East and so on, and Africa and everywhere else, because it was the best way to destroy cultures. If you destroy cultures, the folk will not unify and stand up against an incomer, an invader, or whatever. That's very, very simple. But here's how wonderfully they've fudged the story, you see. Dished out by the government in Britain and put across to you by the media. It's probably a handout by the government. The government's like all these big corporate, they put handouts today to all the papers and they publish them straight in there. A lot of the reporters love it because they don't go out reporting anymore. They sit in their duff and hope that things could get sent into them. So they're only too happy not to criticize it, etc. But here's a good example. And this article here is a recent one too. It's from the Telegraph, December 26. And here's how they say this in the media. Britain edges past France on world stage. I thought it was going to be bad news at first, because we know that France is pretty well bankrupt as well as everybody else. And folk are getting out in droves from France, those with money, because the taxation is so incredibly high in a socialist system, you see. But it says, Britain edges past France on world stage. UK economy boosted by the inclusion of sex and drugs in national accounts. Overtakes France by a whisker to become the world's 5th largest economy. God help the ones underneath it if Britain's doing well, eh? But it says that LinkedIn, I think they call it LinkedIn, has banned profiles promoting sex work and prostitution, even if it's legal where users live. And officials, I have to say things, officials, which officials, whose officials, estimates show prostitution added about £5.7 billion to the UK economy in 2013, while illegal drugs were worth about £6.62 billion. Right? So it's a shake-up so here we are, this is how they refudge things, a shake-up, they call it, of the national accounts this summer. I guess they just grab a box and throw it in the air or something and catch it again. It showed the UK's downturn. Notice how they phrase this. UK's downturn during the Great Recession. Shouldn't it be depression? Because it's never stopped in Britain, really. A few years were from maybe the 60s to the 70s, and then it started plummeting again. Were all that folk had, really. But UK's downturn during the Great Recession was shorter and shallower than previously thought. So all the experts that did the same thing and reshuffled it were wrong the first time. Why are they called experts then, eh? And it helped Britain overtake the Gallic economy by a whisper this year. The Centre for Economics and Business Research said Britain's acceleration was also boosted by the inclusion of sex and drugs to UK growth. Isn't that wonderful? What a way to present it and put it across, eh? While the addition of prostitution and illegal drugs form part of new pan-European accounting standards, what standards did they have there, eh? France has refused to comply with the EU rules because it doesn't consider them to be voluntary commercial activities. Eric Dubois, a researcher at the INSEE France's Statistics Office, has described drugs as a dependency that does not involve free will. He said prostitution was a result of mafia networks, he doesn't mean Italian, and trafficking illegal immigrants. And it says here that this helped the UK to overtake France, having the sex and drugs, by the narrowest of margins. CEBR's analysis showed UK domestic domestic product is expected to total $2.828 trillion, which is £1.816 trillion this year, compared with France's GDP of $2.827 trillion. The CEBR expects Britain to pull further ahead of France in the coming years. This is despite concerns about the sustainability of the UK recovery raised after further data revisions this week showed growth in 5 out of the previous 6 quarters was weaker than thought. So I guess that department better, get that box of stats and so on and throw that up in the air as well and try to get a better reading on that one too. It says nominal UK GDP is expected to grow to $2.95 trillion in 2019 compared with $2.67 trillion in France. I guess I guess that means even more prostitution. Till everybody's a prostitute and everybody's a drug taker. Eh? Isn't that wonderful news? Eh? Isn't that really wonderful? There's no criticism of this. There's no condemnation. And it's quite something. I mean, again, moral relativity rules, right? Where all the different... Remember, these aren't just independent prostitutes, folks. There are whole chains of companies, like a chain, kind of prostitutes in all throughout the country. You see? Monopolize the business. Squeeze out the independent streetwalker, I guess. That's the whole idea. But it's good news for the economy. They reduce the country to drugs and sex, and it's good. There you go. I said this would happen many years ago. Many years ago. Anyway, it goes on to say the French economy has barely grown this year, while the Eurozone is at risk of slipping into a deflationary spiral that economists say may lead to a Japanese-style lost decade. Britain is also on course to leapfrog Germany to become Europe's top economy by 2030, helped by its younger workforce and position outside the Eurozone. I guess it must be bringing more young immigrants in because Hollywood's having children. But everything is nonsense, isn't it? The way it's the presentation, what they give you as facts and figures, is all fudge nonsense. And it also trains you too. There's nothing wrong with prostitution and the big drug business. They cost a fortune on venereal diseases and treating them and so on. And police, when the prostitutes get beaten up, etc. And never mind the rehab centres for all the drug addicts. That's good news, apparently. So it's business, you see. Business for all these spin-offs. And getting back to that article, Perpetual War, where the military said, remember that the military's involved in massive psychological operations and destruction of cultures. You don't know that. Most folk don't know that. But they said they'd export the Hollywood stuff and pornography and all that across the world to corrupt it all, destroy it, destruct it. It's been awfully successful, eh? It's what this article has just told you that it's paying off. Big time. For somebody. Somebody, eh? But that's the world we live in, folks. Perpetual war. Terrorism in the supposed real world. And on the quiet side, under the covers, prostitution and drugs and so on. Because it's good for business and it brings a lot of money in for governments and so on like that. It costs a fortune to police it all. By you pay for all. You see, you pay for all private business. For those who don't know that, private business, big private business, has always got its hands out for bailouts all the time. It doesn't matter what big corporation it is, we support them and finance them and so on. They rake in the profit, and you pay for all this, the fallout on society, and the cleanups, etc., etc. That's how they run things today. And then we go into this article here, and it's again, it's another one. I've gone through again the experiments the military have done over years on their own general population. Again, totally different from movies, because movies, they show you all these authorities are there to help you and they care about, they're one of you. Every member that works is one of you, and they're there to make sure nothing happens to you. But I've shown the documentaries, put the links up, to do with when they sprayed Britain and Norfolk, for instance, with nasty substances from the sea, and it blew across the mainland. That was the purpose of the exercise. Cadmium and things like that, highly carcinogenous and big carcinogen, and many other things too. And that came out, by the way, from the US, because a US officer was involved to go over and watch what was happening there. A US military guy, and he came back to the States, and he was so horrified. Eventually he managed to stop them trying the same thing in the States, at least on that particular project. They've done many other things in the States too, but that's what they do. And then, see, once you spray with this stuff, they follow you with the National Health Service for the rest of your life to see how many folk in that area get, say, genetic malformations, cancers, children who are malformed, genetic changes and so on. And it's a great way to keep track of what's going on, you see. And government didn't say, can we have volunteers for it? No, they just go ahead and they do it. And that was only one experiment. And that's where it wasn't just Norfolk. It was actually, they did it in different places down, especially the East Coast. They even had trucks driving around with the gas coming out the top. And it's never ending, these tests. And it's only, when things leak out or the Official Secret Act is up for that particular project, they'll mention it to a generation that either wasn't born then or they were too young not to care now, you see. They don't care. And it's always used as the same excuse. Well, it's in case any enemy uses this. You want to know the effects of it. Anyway, Scots orphans are used in military experiments from the Daily Express, December 21st. And it says that Lennox Castle, they show you Lennox Castle, is one of 4 Scottish institutions alleged to have been involved. The allegations centre on at least 4 institutions where thousands of children are said to have been experimented upon in conditions described as like something out of Auschwitz. It's alleged that Porton Down is a big military establishment for all the bacterial and warfare stuff in Britain, and I think they moved another place recently, not too long ago, but they got them all over the world, of course, these places. It is alleged that Porton Down, top-secret military facility in Wiltshire, was involved in trialling drugs for use in the Cold War on youngsters who were regarded as feeble-minded. One survivor told the paper he has obtained written and video evidence that will pass to the public inquiry into historical abuse of children in care when it begins next year. Again, they use these terms like in care. Because you never suspect, or the child's been taken into care. You never suspect it. It sounds like, well, they're going to care for that child. Oh, really? Yeah. Says the man, now in his 50s, has been advised by lawyers to conceal his identity for his own safety until his full submission can be lodged at the inquiry announced by Scottish Education Secretary Angela Constance. However, he was willing to divulge some of his intended testimony about the treatment he and others suffered. He said 6- and 7-year-olds were tied to racks and given electric shocks, just like they were doing in Canada and other countries too, with MK Ultra and various other things, experimentation with LSD. He said, I was incarcerated with orderlies armed with rubber coshes. We were imprisoned, experimented upon, lobotomies. He says, you name it, they did it. And he says, I was classified as a misfit, a mental oddity, made a ward of the court. Once you're a ward of the court, folks, the state owns you. They can do what they want with you. But again, if you're disagreeable, or today it could be called antisocial behaviour or something, or you're talking back all the time, or you're asking questions which you don't like anymore, they drug you in school for that. And it says, a misfit. It says, my mother was killed, I guess, in an accident or something, and I became an orphan, so they took it upon themselves to have me experimented upon. And it says the witness believes that there may have been as many as 3,500 children who were involved in the Porton Down testing program over the years. It says the drug program ran from 1948 to 1982. It may have continued for all we know. So I believe this happens throughout the UK, but I'm referring to Scotland. He says, I've got evidence on paper and film, and I'll hand it to the public inquiry. I hope he's got lots of copies made, because things tend to disappear once you hand them officially in. And he says, Lennox Castle Hospital, which closed in 2002, and is now the site of the Celtic Football Club's training ground, was home to children and adults with learning difficulties or conditions such as Down syndrome, as well as truants, unmarried mothers, and wayward teenagers. It says, last night, Professor Ulf Schmidt of the University of Kent, Britain's leading expert on human experimentation at Porton Down, said he'd never heard of a drug trial program involving orphans. I guess he meant in Britain, because it came out in the States. They were trying it in the States as well. They're using black children too to experiment on, etc., etc. It's well exposed and well known, and admitted to eventually. He added, this is not to say these experiments didn't happen, but I'd be very cautious in dealing with these allegations. Well, these experts always work for their side, of course. You know, that's their job, is to soften things or discredit them. But it says some stories have appeared and reappeared over the past 50 years, including a similar one about drug testing and euthanasia involving elderly people that was eventually shown to be false. 6 years ago, hundreds of veterans who volunteered to take part in tests at Portadown were offered £3 million in compensation. Of course, they were offered that £3 million by the government that probably denied that it never happened, you see. But anyways, these volunteers at Portadown were exposed to nerve agents such as sarin gas and hallucinogens such as LSD. In the most infamous case from 1953, Ronald Madison took part in a trial of what he believed he was a cold remedy, but died within an hour of having sarin dabbed on his arm. Other Portadown experiments included spraying bacteria over the south coast of England and dropping cancer-causing particles from planes, and that's all well documented and filmed, photographed, and put documentaries about it since, because no one cares nowadays, you see. It says, and Grenard Islands in Wester Ross had to be sealed off for almost 50 years after it was contaminated with anthrax during the Second World War. There's old documentaries up on that, and you see them exploding these things across the hillsides with sheep on them to test them. And they did it elsewhere too, by the way. And it created, well, it's still supposedly contaminated today, although the Navy does still go in and out of there. It says Portadown is the home of the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, an agency of the Ministry of Defence. And a spokeswoman said, a PR agent, you see, we're not aware of any tests involving children at Portadown and have seen absolutely no evidence to back up these claims. That's what the government tells you, you see. But I can remember Ronald Reagan when he said that the most terrifying words that a citizen can hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Hasn't changed, never will. Never will. And talking about the society going down the tubes, of course, because we're becoming more progressive. We're progressive today, you see. And free. We're freer than ever before, you know. That's what they keep telling you. And we've got different values, but we're still progressive. What is progress? Who defines what progress is? Because no matter how worse and worse it gets, you've got these different groups for government saying, they're always talking about every speech they make, progress. Families are defunct and dysfunctional. We've got legal and illegal prostitution on the go and drugs all over the place, shipped in by governments, of course. And they've given you years and years of the music going down, because you must always use culture industry to destroy everything, including entertainment of all kinds. And because people emulate what they see. But this teenager shot dead by a shopper after he tried to steal his limited edition Nike Air Jordans that had just sold out in a store. And Jawad Jabbar, 16 of Middletown, Ohio, went to Dayton Mall to buy Nikes. The sports shop sold out of them, and the teenager became desperate. Imagine getting desperate because something you didn't need had been sold out. So he pulled a gun on he's 16 years old, he pulled a gun on a shopper who had just bought a pair of the sneakers. The shopper also had a gun and shot the teen dead outside the mall. These things are probably made in China for about 50 cents. Everything else is, but they sell it for a big price over here. Make it cheap, massive profit, maximize profit, and publicize it. And the schmucks buy it. So it says here the shopper was also carrying a gun and had a permit for it, and shot Jabbar, who died a short time later of a gunshot wound to his torso, the authorities said. And it says the police chief Ronald Hess said initial investigation showed that the teens were outside on a sidewalk when the two men left the mall carrying newly bought shoes. Jabbar displayed a gun and demanded their merchandise. Then the man with the concealed weapon permit pulled out his gun and shot him. No one else was injured. So according to the police, two groups didn't know each other but had all gone to the mall south of Dayton, Ohio, for the Nike Air Jordan sales offered by multiple stores. It says the stores had set up a system to avoid long, tense lines that have been led to problems elsewhere when the popular brand had released new versions of the Middletown. But the Middletown teens missed out, it says. The other 2 teens involved in the shooting are being held in juvenile detention while the investigation continues. Well, I've had years of gangster rap, you see, gangster. And this is what you get from the culture industry. Because that's who promoted it all. That's who created it all, too. Quite some, right? And as they finish off countries totally, completely, as they've been doing for years in some countries in the West, it says the UK border controls at Terminal 5 Heathrow European freedom of movements rules do not allow family members of EU citizens to be blocked if they don't have a visa. So Britain cannot impose a blanket visa requirement on family members originally from outside Europe, but who have valid EU residence rights, the European Court of Justice has ruled. And it goes on with this story, but the fact is, see, many folk have come for years from, say, from India or Africa and different places. They manage to get 3 years into a country, they get a residency, and then they go into another European country and then send for their relatives who are still back in the original country. So it's just the ongoing destruction of it. It says Britain cannot impose a blanket visa requirement on family members originally from outside Europe. So the decision is another setback in the government's campaign to control immigration from the European Union. They have never tried to control it. That stopped really back in the 60s, I think. And sped up. Concluded that the EU's freedom of movement rules trump British claims that visas were needed to combat abuse of EU residence card system. The judges in Luxembourg said the Colombian wife of Sean McCarthy, a dual British and Irish national living in Spain, didn't need a UK visa or family permit to visit Britain. So that's it. The permits you normally get were valid for 6 months, so now they can just come in and stay. You don't need it. So it's just the ongoing war, you see, to destroy all that was and all the nations that were. That's all. And the other big news too is to do with all the different bills they rammed through at Christmas time. We haven't got a list of them yet. Only 1 or 2. Generally wait until all the congressmen have gone home and 4 of them sit there and pass laws. That's how the US Federal Reserve was put in fact, I believe. It's a great time to do it. And I've never covered that loophole or closed that loophole to stop them doing it again. Of course, that's why they leave it open, just like the bankers' bailouts and all the rest of it keep going and going and going. But because there's so much corruption across the board today and money, wherever you see big pots of money being gathered, there's corruption involved. Often started up like Ponzi schemes by the shysters, the con men, who become the heads of things, you see. They start up with the intention of plundering it down the road. Anyway, it says more than 100,000 New Yorkers could face cuts in their union pensions in coming years, thanks to provision that was tucked into Congress's omnibus spending bill this month to keep the federal government funded for another year. There'll be lots more will be stuck in there. It's thousands of pages, as always. The measure would, under certain conditions, allow cuts to what are known as multi-employer pensions. These are union-run plans that cover workers who may have had a variety of different employers in a given industry, such as trucking or mining. After hits from the 2008 Wall Street crash and declining union membership, some of these plans are underfunded and won't have the money in the long run to meet their obligations. It's always getting spent as it comes in and loaned out for other big businesses and so on. That's what they use the money for. Some of the unions, such as the Teamsters with its Central States Pension Fund, lobbied for the amendment since they may have to make the cuts to stay solvent. About 150 such plans nationally could be affected. This is in the States, of course. This issue is starting to gain traction politically as a variety of groups question why the amendment was passed with little discussion and whether there are alternatives to keep these pension funds healthy. These were pensions that were guaranteed. The AARP New York spokesman Eric Chris said early Monday on the Capitol Press Room radio show, and so it's a bad precedent. We wanted alternatives, said Jolene Leville of the Pension Rights Centre. This is, she stressed that cuts, if made, would take at least a year to carry out. In order to make a reduction, a pension plan would have to be deemed as having critical status or below 60% funding and declining. It's unclear how many pension funds will have to make reductions. If a fund in this category didn't make the cuts, the Federal Department of Treasury could order the reductions if they posed a threat to the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corps. That's the federal agency which backstops private pensions to provide at least some assurance that retirees will get checks. But in the worst case, the pensions pay meagre amounts, often below $13,000 per annum, I guess. The Federal Department of Labour enlists multi-employer pensions that in 2014 entered critical status, but doesn't show those that are declining. It goes on to say here that the Federal Department of Labour lists multi-employer pensions that in 2014 entered the critical status, but doesn't show those that are declining. In New York, critical funds included the 1199 SEIU Greater New York Pension Plan, Bricklayers and Allied Crafts Workers Local 5, and 32BJ North Pension Fund. These are all funds for people who worked in the private sector. Public sector employee pensions, those by work for the state, are protected by New York State Constitution. As always, every country does that. The government can raise taxes or make cuts elsewhere if it runs short of money for public sector pensions. They're like their own, right? And it says, according to AARP, 59 pension plans affecting 100,632 New York retirees could be affected by the cuts if they go through. The average pension benefit is $6,965 per year, but after cuts that could fall as low as $2,322 annually, it says. So, well, they should take a leaf from Britain. Apparently they're really thriving with prostitution and drugs. So to speak, it pulled them out the hole. Anyway, that's what's happening, folks. It was always intended this happen at this time, and you're going down into austerity, as I've said for years and years and years. When the big boys talked about austerity and the mainstream parroted it all to you, that was the agenda. All your spending money one day will be to bare essentials to scrape through. Bare essentials and necessities. That's the old idea. And this article 2 is from the Daily Caller, and it says, International Brotherhood of Teamsters General President Jimmy Hoffa Jr. is suspected by his members of trying to squash a union comprised of some of his own Teamster organizers. His battle with his own organizers at union overlaps with a host of other problems for the prominent Labour leader, including a pension crisis that's undercutting his support, and a potential UPS strike that might not be able to afford, it says to insiders. Hoffa still has not granted a contract to the Federation of Agents and International Representatives, a union which represents Teamsters organisers. The National Labour Relations Board allowed FAIR, this other company, to represent some of Teamsters organisations last year in the negotiations with Hoffa, after organisers voted 18-16 to unionise in a Teamsters election. So the battles are already underway with all of this kind of stuff, as you can see. And also this article here, it says, union retirees don't cut my pension. More than 1 million current and retired truck drivers, construction workers, and other union employees could see their pension benefits cut now that Congress has passed a controversial new measure. I'll put all these links up tonight, remember, and if you're interested, it might affect you. You should look them up. It says, but retirees aren't exactly seeing it that way. Many give up years of pay increases and contribute thousands of dollars from their salaries each year towards their promised pensions. And that's what the company's been doing for years. Hey, well, if they cut back and less money, work for less money for better tomorrow, and you always get screwed at the end. That's the standard stuff, isn't it? As a result, many have little savings outside their pension benefits and Social Security checks, and they aren't sure how they'll make ends meet if the cuts go through. And this gives you an example of one man. It says, in the worst case scenario, it says, Shahid Scheid, his name is. I think it's. You could see it, this particular guy, 63-year-old, says, who worked loading and unloading trucks for years and years. He says, you could see his current annual benefits of around $37,000 a year reduced to as little as $15,000. He receives his checks from the Central States, Southeast and Southwest Areas Pension Fund. One of the multi-employer plans is now qualified to cut benefits under the law. They can do anything they want to you under the law. If they don't have a law there, they simply put one in. And it's legal, you see, to screw you. That's what you vote for, folks. Haven't you learned? That's why you vote for these people who take care of you, the authorities, who are really servants, supposedly, public servants and stuff like that. To take care of your well-being and all that. And you keep voting for them. Hell is repetition, eh? And this is quite an interesting little article too. For years and years, using the environmental movement and so on, the big corporations have been taking over vast swaths of land across Canada and the States and elsewhere. And eventually, of course, the big corporations will get the rights to use them as carbon sinks and claim tax money for it and all that kind of thing, money from you, for doing nothing. And also under all the different UN agreements they've made, these wilderness areas, as they call them, the government can authorize certain corporations to go in and drill, to extract things. The same crew as always. But it says that a proposal to designate more than 250,000 acres in the western U.S. as wilderness, thereby placing severe restrictions on land use and having the potential to ultimately drive ranchers out of business, small competitors sort of thing, compared against the big boys, was quietly inserted into the National Defense Authorization Act by House and Senate lawmakers Tuesday night. National Defense Authorization Act. And it says Senator Ted Cruz in a statement Wednesday called the move an extreme land grab and urged House and Senate to reject this attempt by self-serving politicians to exploit the men and women of the military to serve their special interests. So they're using the National Defense Authorization Act to put this through. The new wilderness area includes portions of New Mexico, Washington, Colorado, Nevada, and Montana. It says wilderness designations were created by the Wilderness Act in 1964. Wilderness is defined as an area of undeveloped federal land retaining its primeval character and influence without permanent improvements or human habitation, which is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions. It says government and land regulations, including wilderness designations, are investigated in The Blazes TV season finale, or final episode, For the Record, it's called, For the Record, the final episode, Losing Our Land, Wednesday, December 3rd, 8 p.m. And it says, for ranchers who use public lands to graze their cattle, wilderness designation can mean severe restrictions, both in the number of cattle they're allowed to raise and how they're allowed to maintain their land. John Fowler is an agriculture economist at New Mexico State University, who studied the impact of wilderness designations on ranching. He says that despite promises from Congress that wilderness designations would not hurt the allotment or number of cows a rancher is allowed to raise on a certain piece of land, in reality they represent a crushing blow. He goes on to say that for ranchers who use public lands to graze their cattle, wilderness designation can mean severe restrictions with the number of cattle, etc. But it says John Fowler is an agricultural economist at New Mexico State University who studied the impact of wilderness designations on ranching. He said despite promises from Congress that wilderness designations would not hurt the allotment or number of cows a rancher is allowed to raise on a certain piece of land, in reality they represent a crushing blow. The ranches around the wilderness were cut by 55%, but those ranches that were in the heart of the wilderness have lost up to 95% of their capacity, Fowler told For the Record. Walt Anderson, a rancher in southern New Mexico, said that being limited to smaller herds of cattle can drive people out of business quickly. He says that a real easy way to come in and cut your cattle numbers is to point that you can no longer function, Anderson said. You can't pay your taxes, you can't keep up your waters. Another impact on ranchers in wilderness areas comes from the restrictions placed on motorized vehicles. And just listening to this. I said that. You see, they just make rules and rules until it's impossible to do anything. They'll say, well, we're not stopping you doing it, but they put all these rules down. Here's how they do it. It says, instead of using a pickup or four-wheeler to build and maintain water systems and other critical infrastructure, even bringing feeding, everything must be hauled in by horse or other pack animal. They tell them, okay, you've got to do it all on horseback now. Pack mule, load up your pickup and go do it on horseback. It says you can't do it mechanically, which was put in mechanically to start with, Anderson says. The water lines have to be repaired, etc. So there's how they do it, folks. Yeah. That's how they do it. Corporations only, international corporations only, you see. Big corporations only. Small private businesses to be completely obliterated. And have been driving small business under for years and years and years, of all kinds. Now, the beauty too of monopoly is once they get it monopolized, they can do what they want. And again, they're big lobby guys that donate to get guys to run for elections and so on as well. Every donation, remember, is really a bribe. We put you in, and this is what you do for us when you're in. You see, they call it lobbying. But it says power generation firms from Britain are to receive close to £1 billion to ensure their plants stay open and prevent blackouts. Well, they'll get it, or they already get paid for that. That's what you're paying for. The payments will add £11 to an average household electricity bill, according to the Department of Energy and Climate Change. And climate change. The government has decided the outcome is good news for consumers. It's good news. You have to spin it for you. Which guaranteed security of supply. But critics of the new plan say that most of the payments will go to plants that would have remained open anyway. And that's true. You see? This is more profit, that's all. Around 50 firms took part in an auction this weekend to secure the capacity payments. In return, the companies guaranteed to keep their plants available during periods of peak demand and to back up intermittent wind generation. More than 49 gigawatts of capacity was securely delivered for 2018-19, or will be, it says, 2018-19. So it's guaranteed. They can guarantee it now for then, of course. And then they'll say, well, we couldn't manage it. But it says a price of £19.40 per kilowatt. This is below some estimates that led to falls in the shares of some energy firms. You see, it's all about the falling shares for the big stockholders. The Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Energy, Ed Davey, described the result as fantastic news for bill payers and business. It's great, you're paying more. It's fantastic news. Wow, look at the bright side, eh? We are guaranteeing security at the lowest cost for consumers, he says. We've done this by ensuring that we will get the best out of our existing power stations and unlocking new investment in flexible What's a flexible plant, eh? But it says critics of the scheme argue that it will keep older polluting coal plants, so this is another environmental group, on the system for longer, which could hold back investment in new cleaner technologies. Like what? More wind farms? Greenpeace, see how they play it all with all their big NGOs that work for the big corporations, eh? Said that 6 coal plants were described as amongst the most pollutant in Europe would receive payments running to hundreds of millions of pounds. Well, heck, we're giving money to places like India, an emerging nation under the World Trade Organization and the United Nations, to build more and more coal mines, right? But that's okay for that. That's okay for that. But not for you. No. I guess that's what they call clean money, eh? Making it clean energy, clean money. More profits, massive profits for the big boys at the top. And it goes on and on and on. Cash bonuses and so on to these power stations. It says giving a cash bonus to already profitable power stations just to keep doing what they're already doing won't make Britain more energy secure in the long term. For this to happen, we need investments in a modern, smart, flexible energy infrastructure, said Greenpeace UK energy campaigner Lawrence Carter. What we should do is get all these NGO greenies and get some exercise bicycles, put the belt for the back wheel on a little generator, and then you can hook up all these generators, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and get them pedaling to keep us all safe and breathing nice air and stuff. And mind you, it'll give a lot of CO2 as you breathe faster and heavier. If they work on that one, maybe you could tax them on that. I don't know. Mohawk's got lots of possibilities, you know. And then China is to pay £100 million for 80% stake in 3 UK wind farms. China's biggest nuclear energy firm is about to enter the European market and priced by the 3 UK wind farms from EDF for £100 million. It's first outside of China. The move by state-owned China General Nuclear Corporation, it's just great having a sort of communist system that's fascist and capitalist at the same time, isn't it? You got a whole population willing to work for peanuts, and you got all that money to play with then at the top. Right? It says will be announced on Monday. AFT.com reported Sunday. China's CCGN will take an 80% stake in the wind farms, and EDF will keep 20%. EDF will also operate the facilities and buy the electricity generated. Together, the sites will produce more than 70 megawatts of electricity, enough to power 40,000 homes, FT reports. China is also negotiating a deal to team up with Électricité de France to build 2 nuclear reactors at the Hinkley Point site in southwest England. See, there is divvying up countries now with free trade deals with big international corporations, eh? In 2013, the 2 biggest Chinese companies, CNNC and CGN, together made a bid to take over 40% Britain's Hinkley Point nuclear plant and so on, or project. And it goes on about that as well. But, yeah, China's the model state for the world. It's much better, you know, when you only have one kind of government, Politburo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a head honcho. And you can pay your peasants wages, you know. Make them for stuff awfully cheap and sell it for a big profit abroad. You see? And just to get into the weather nonsense and so on, I mean, here I've had a little bit of thaw, because sometimes get it in January. They used to call it the January thaw, but sometimes you get it in December. So there's been a little bit of a thaw. But it's still snow and lots of ice on the ground right now, and we're back down to freezing. And it's to go down to way below freezing for the next week or so. But it says here, this is in Britain, UK. It says, cars abandoned and 100,000 people without power as winter storms cause chaos. They shouldn't have to worry about without power, because believe you me, they're going to guarantee it in a few years' time you're going to have power, you know, just like that. Money proves it, you see, all that money. But it says, violent winter storms have wreaked havoc across the UK, causing travel chaos as vast swathes of Britain were hit by snow and ice. This is after the Met told them we're going to have one of the warmest winters of all. And it says, sleet and snow hit the north of England, the Midlands and Scotland. The Met offices have warned that nearly all UK has been gripped by ice. The freezing weather has brought treacherous conditions to the road, with many motorists in Sheffield forced to abandon their cars after becoming snowed in. More than 100,000 homes were left with power shortages as heavy snow wreaked havoc on the electricity cables. A Western Power Distribution spokesman said 36,000 customers were left without power, and another 69,000 had short interruptions on. It says, as the winter weather front moves across the country, the Met Office has warned there's a 90% chance of more severe cold, ice and snow striking between today and New Year. The cold weather alerts has also raised fears of an increase in the health risk to vulnerable patients. It means they will kill off more pensioners and so, and a potential disruption of the delivery services. And they've been warned not to travel, motorists and so on, unless absolutely necessary. It's really good when you get global warming like that. Yep. Lots and lots of people have been stranded, and lots of cars abandoned, and so on and so on and so on. So, there you go. That's just shows you. And to finish up tonight, it's quite interesting. And on Breitbart, it says NOAA Gate. That's NOAA Gate. How ocean acidification could turn out to be the biggest con since Michael Mann's hockey stick. Christmas has become a couple of days early for climate skeptics, and what maybe proved to be one of the biggest blows to the global warming religion since ClimateGate. This time the pillar of green faith, which has been rudely dismantled by skeptical investors, is alleged phenomenon known as ocean acidification. For years, this has been touted by environmentalists as possibly the greatest threat to the planet after global warming. According to Jane Lubchenco, the head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, it is climate change is equally twin evil because of the disastrous consequences it may have for everything from the navigational systems of spawning salmon to the health of coral reefs. Wow. Have they made a science fiction movie about this one yet? Ocean acidification. I don't know. It's good for brainwashing folk. But it says, ocean acidification is said to be caused when excess atmospheric carbon dioxide is absorbed by the sea, reducing its pH levels to make it more acidic. But as What's Up With That reports, new evidence unearthed by an inquisitive graduate student suggests that ocean acidification may be a scientific fraud to rank with the greatest man-made global warming scare. At the center of the scandal is NOAA, the U.S. federal agency which measures and researches changes in the oceans and atmosphere, and which maintains one of the temperature data sets that used to measure global warming. You know, all these the computer imagines it's going to be by the imaginative guys that feed stuff into it. It says one of NOAA's departments, the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory, also happens to be one of the mainstays of the alarmist narrative about ocean acidification. So its own department, you see, is the one putting it out. A 2004 paper by two of PMEL's senior oceanographers, Dr. Richard Freely and Dr. Christopher Sabine, is often cited in support of ocean acidification theory and is reproduced in simple form at NOAA's website. I'll put the link up for that too. It also forms part of a testimony that Freely gave to Congress in 2010, again to the effect that increasing atmospheric CO2 is causing a reduction in seawater pH. It warns, it says, the impacts of ocean acidification on shelled organisms and other animals could negatively affect marine food webs, and when combined with other climate changes could substantially alter the number, variety and health of ocean wildlife. As humans continue to send more and more carbon dioxide into the oceans, as humans are doing it, you see, the impacts on marine ecosystems will be direct and profound. And then it says, the message is clear, excessive carbon dioxide poses a threat to the health of our oceans. However, now it seems that the paper's certainty is at best misplaced, at worst outright dishonest. Not unlike Michael Mann's discredited hockey stick graph, it appears to depend on cherry-picked data and misleading projections in defiance of real-world evidence. The alleged fraud was uncovered by Mike Wallace, a hydrologist with nearly 30 years' experience now working towards his PhD at the University of New Mexico. While studying a chart produced by Freely and Sabine, apparently showing a strong correlation between rising atmospheric CO2 levels and falling ocean pH levels, Wallace noticed that some key information had been omitted. Mysteriously, the chart only began in 1988, the one that these two characters had used. But Wallace knew for a fact that there were ocean pH measurements dating back to at least 100 years earlier, and was puzzled that this solid data had been ignored in favour of computer model projections. Same old story, eh? When Wallace emailed his query to Freely and Sabine, however, he found them less than helpful. And Sabine replied that it was inappropriate for Wallace to impugn the motives or quality of our science, and warned that if he continued in this manner, you will not last long in your career. Isn't that the typical warning, eh? Having provided Wallace with a few links, all of which turned out to be useless, he concluded his email by saying, I hope you will refrain from contacting me again. This response again calls to mind the behaviour of Michael Mann in response to queries from Steve McIntyre about where to find the raw data for his hockey stick. Mann was similarly obfuscatory, rude and dismissive. Undeterred, Wallace eventually got hold of the instrumental records which Freely and Sabine had chosen to exclude from their graph of doom and plotted a time series chart of his own covering the period from 1910 to the present. His results were surprising. What they suggest is that global acidification is a figment of Freely's and Sabine's imagination. There's been no reduction in oceanic pH levels in the last century. Wallace says oceanic acidification may seem like a minor issue to some, but besides being wrong, it is a crucial leg to the entire narrative of human-influenced climate change. Remember what the guys who dreamed all this idea up, the Club of Rome said in about 1978. They said that they were looking for something to cut back the population and everything else. And they thought, well, the climate and famine and so on they would use that. The climate change and global warming and so on. And so therefore man was the enemy. This is the standard stuff. So it says that human influence climate change. Oh, you see. He adds, in whose professional world is it acceptable to omit the majority of the data and also not disclose emission to any other solar congressional body? And it gives you the background of the story, the whole story. And you can read Marita Noon's full account, and they give the link for Marita Noon, and so on and so on. But that's the world you live in, folks. Everything's fudged. All the data is fudged when the big agendas have been planned and agreed upon by the secret boys that really run your world for you. Because all your countries are on board with it on every issue, in fact. There's no dissension whatsoever. As long as you get to split the loot for the big, really corporate owners at the top, really. All the politicians will do what they're told, exactly what they're told. And that's just a little bit of food for thought, as I say, for before the new year. And I hope you're all doing well and not letting it all get to you, because seeing through the cons helps you. It helps you. You expect them to lie to you and con you all the time, because you live in the age of lies and conology. It's the way it's been for a while. It's all professionally done now, you see. And since mass media gets the so-called news doesn't mean truth or fact. It means here's new nonsense, you see. As long as you get that out to the whole world at the same time, anybody starts prating about it, well, I think it's true. It's quite simple, isn't it? And you're awfully impressed you've been taught to be impressed by people with lots of letters behind their names. Oh, he's an expert, so-and-so on so-and-so. And he'll prattle his head off. This guy is living off you, the taxpayer, to dream up absolute nonsense. In ancient times, he'd be channeling Moses or somebody and writing it in some book. I mean, these are the sort of characters that run the world. And you've been taught to respect them, you see. So easy to con you. I mean, you have all these experts running the economies, and they're never getting anything right, apparently. They never see depressions, never see crashes. It's a complete shock to them, as it is to you, for goodness sake. So how can they be experts in anything? Everything is a joke. Everything's to do with another agenda. And agendas run on scam after scam after scam. They can't say to you, oh, please stop having children altogether, you lot, because you're the wrong sort to have children. You see? No, they would get all these other ways to work it. Just like as mentioned with the farmers there in the Wilderness Act. Oh, now you can't drive your truck to deliver feed. Oh no, you can get a donkey though. You can get a donkey, carry that bale of hay and they feed them. You see, that's how they do it. Step by step, bill by bill. Well, now you can't heat yourself at home. And it's okay for you to buy oil or gas from the big corporations to pump up your chimney, but don't burn wood or coal or anything. Oh, no. No. See, corporations have blessed. It's holy. It's very kosher. It's all blessed smoke, you see. Blessed it is. Makes all the difference in the world. From Hamish Marcella from Ontario, Canada, it's good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.